What is the silliest thing you were scared of as a child? Story 1. I remember being like 7 years old watching a documentary with my parents talking about the sun blowing up in 6 billion years, and I was terrified to go outside for a few months. Story 2. My mom told us the four-way flashers button on the dashboard was a child eject button for kids fighting in the car. Story 3. Monsters under the bed. So we had to broad jump from the hallway to the bed every night if the lights were off, and you always had to keep at least a sheet over your feet so the monsters under the bed couldn't reach up and grab them. Story 4. The Flying Monkeys from Wizard of Oz. ETA. I had no idea this was so common. Makes me feel a lot more normal. Funniest part is every year I would swear I wouldn't have nightmares this time and beg to watch it again, and every year I'd have nightmares again. Story 5. I had this odd fear that if I left any body part hanging off the edge of my bed, that a monster, or someone, I don't know, would go around the entire circumference of my bed with a chainsaw and cut off the overhanging limb. I haven't the slightest idea where that came from, but it must have had a huge impact since I can still remember it after 50 years. Story 6. Ugly haircuts, and the people wearing them by extension. I cried on the first day of kindergarten because a boy with a bowl cut sat at my table. Story 7. Dog saw me, ran over, terrified me for a split second, and then, the next thing I know, my face is getting covered in saliva as his owner laughs. I giggled and pushed him off, and he just sat next to me with what looked like a big smile on his face. I pet him as my father came out, and the neighbor and him talked and chuckled to each other. Dog gave me one last lick on the cheek before leaving. Never been scared of dogs since. Story 8. I was absolutely terrified of 1. Ending up in witness protection, 2. Spontaneously combusting, 3. Accidentally passing through the Bermuda Triangle, and 4. My dad dying in space. I grew up in a tiny Welsh town. It's sweet how exciting I thought my life had the potential to be. Answer. With regards to the last one, though, I genuinely lived in constant fear of my dad dying. I thought about it constantly and would often cry myself to sleep over it. I have 2 strong memories, one of walking home from school, chatting to my gran, and suddenly trying to hide my face so she wouldn't see I had tears streaming down, because I briefly remembered an advert where a man died in the army, and I thought about it being my dad. Another memory of being in a Titanic exhibition when I was 8. They had a feature where your ticket had the name of a passenger, and then, at the end, you find out whether they lived or died. My dad and I swapped because his had a woman's name and mine had a man's. My passenger ended up surviving and his died. I burst into tears while a load of Americans awed at me, lol. I don't know why that was so ingrained in my head. My dad didn't have a dangerous job. Riskiest thing he did was smoke. He'd never had a scary accident or illness. At that point, he'd never lost anyone. And although I loved both of my parents equally, I didn't have that same all-consuming dread about my mam. Looking back now, I think I had pretty bad OCD as a kid. Story 9. The Mussel. It lived in my closet and came out to eliminate me while I slept. I was terrified for quite a while. Then my mom or dad, not sure, sat me down and told me what a mussel was, where they are, showing me arm and leg muscles, etc. Never lost any more sleep over it. I think I was 3 because it was before I could read. Story 10. There's a superstition in my home country that says if someone steps over you, you won't grow anymore, and that person must step over you again to reverse the curse. So basically, as a kid, I used to freak out if someone stepped over me and would chase them down to make sure they stepped back over me. I guess someone forgot to step back over me, because I still didn't grow much. I'm only 1.5 tall. Story 11. I was sure my parents were probably gonna eliminate me at some point. They gave me no reason to think so. We're very nice, and gave me a whole lot to be thankful for. I was just convinced they'd realize one day it was just too much work and go back to just having 2 kids again. Answer. When I was little, I thought that adults turned into monsters after kids went to sleep. It did a great job keeping me in bed. The truth of where it came from is that my parents would wait to argue until after I went to bed, at least when I was little. Their intentions were good, but it was a small house and I could still hear them. My kid brain interpreted that as monsters. Story 12. She used to tell us to behave, or the Zaba, I think it's spelled, pronounced Jabba, would get us. We always assumed it was the devil or a demon or something really bad. We were genuinely afraid of this thing. Grandma D passed away. My older sister went to college and signed up for Slovenian as an elective. First day of class, she told the above story, and the prof nearly fell off his chair laughing. Zeba, frog. Answer. OMG, that reminds me of my German grandma. She would get annoyed at kids doing dumb things and mutter something that sounded to me like krutz. I was afraid to ask about it since she had also tried to teach us a little ditty in German about a soldier relieving himself on a hill. A few decades after Grandma had passed, I finally asked her younger cousin what it meant. She laughed and said, "I forgot our grandmother used to call us little frogs." I had been mishearing the word, which was frush. Story 13. Dying in quicksand, Bermuda Triangle, even though I lived on the complete opposite side of the planet. Lolo. Story 14. Those fashion dummies in shops. I used to have nightmares about broken ladies. No one knew what I was talking about at first. I was utterly terrified of them, but would get dragged around department stores anyway, screaming my kid head off, being told to shut up, getting smacked and told everyone was looking at me. Story 15. Superman through when the woman is pulled into the machine and starts turning into a robot. Scared the shoot out of me. Edit. I just went onto YouTube to watch it. It's so cheesy, but I still don't like it. Story 16. The Mosquito Fogger truck had an entire lore built around the guy who came through the neighborhood in the darkness of the night. It was very chitty, bang bang, snatching the children and whatnot. Story 17. Anytime I couldn't see my feet under a counter or at a toilet, I was nervous a snake was about to bite my feet. Story 18. Pregnant women IDKY but terrified me. As an adult woman who has been pregnant was not scared of myself, but other pregnant women still mildly creepy. Story 19. And the killer, a fictional, I think, person who lived in a shack in the woods up the hill by our apartments. One of the older girls told us about him, and I was so terrified of getting eliminated that I would sprint from light to light if I was outside at night. Because he only eliminate you if you were in the dark. Sometimes I still think about it and get wary of, I'm outside in the dark. I was around 9 or 10 then. I'm 31 now. Story 20. Being kidnapped. That kid, Adam, was kidnapped and taken down when I was a little kid. They put a made-for-TV movie about it, and I watched it. I was sure any time we went anywhere there was some weirdo lurking just waiting to snatch me up. Story 21. Escalators. I think it was an episode of Rescue 911 back in the day. Some kid got sucked into one, and I was scared of escalators for the longest time. I'm still nervous getting on and off of them, actually, at 38. Story 22. Somehow, I got the idea that my grandfather's ghost had possessed a picture of him that we had, and that he was going to jump out of it and get me. I avoided being alone in the living room, where it was kept, for ages until my mom asked what was going on. I should add that he died long before I was born and was by all accounts a wonderful father. So even if ghosts were real, there was no good reason to think he'd be malevolent. Story 23. Outside flowers. I got stung by a bee hiding in one when I was 3 and thought for a good few years after that there were always be some sort of creepy crawlies hiding in them that would come out and attack me if I touched them. I was very skeptical of the large garden store that my mom loved. Story 24. Squirrels. Whenever I would see one when I was out in the yard, I'd go back inside. I was also scared of cats for a bit because my grandparents had a really mean cat. I ended up loving cats, even that cat. You just had to respect her boundaries. Story 25. I'm autistic and certain frequencies would cause a panic attack, and that frequency just so happened to be in my younger brother's favorite song, The Living Tombstone, Five Nights at Freddy's song, and he would play it all the time thinking I was scared of the game, but little did he know it was a sensory nightmare for me, and he was torturing my brain lobes. Story 26. When I was really little, I thought skim milk was skin milk and thought there would be lumps of skin in it. I refused to drink milk for a while. Story 27. When I was 6, I saw a documentary on the BTK killer resurfacing, and for a week I couldn't sleep because I was convinced he was gonna come eliminate me. I lived in NYC. Story 28. Not me, but my little cousin was terrified of butterflies. He thought they were going to eat him. There was no convincing him that butterflies don't hurt people. Story 29. The Bigfoot that lived in the basement and would come out and eat me if I didn't run up the stairs fast enough after turning off the lights. Story 30. I genuinely thought I would be unlucky enough to get struck by lightning and would always hide under the table in the basement whenever it started thundering out. Now, I don't even think about it or care. If I get struck, that means my shoot life is over, and I'm okay with that. Story 31. The leprechaun shape in my bedroom curtains after the lights were off. I could not see the shape in the light. Story 32. Our long dark hallway with stairs going down to basement at one end. Bedrooms were fine, living room was fine. Getting from one to the other at night was tricky. Story 33. Mirrors in the dark. I distinctly remember a dream I had as a very young child. I was in a dark room and all I could see was a golden framed mirror. I looked into it, but all I could see was endless darkness. It was a pretty spooky dream, a nightmare about a night mirror. In hindsight, sort of funny how toddlers interpret things. Night mirror. LOL. Story 34. Airheads. The commercials of people's heads blown up like a balloon made me think it would actually do that LOL. Story 35. True story. The Rapture. I had friends that were very heavily evangelical, and their local church was all about what happens when Jesus comes back and how you should be prepared every day for it to happen. They were very politically charged, you must live Reagan Bush, but like science fiction, believe in creationism. My church was very liberal-leaning. We accepted all, we loved all, very community-minded, very science-minded. My friends would tell us how their pastor would tell them who would go to heaven and who wouldn't. My little liberal mind was very concerned that since I liked science, And Star Wars, I was going to be ripped out of my life and punished. Story 36. My grandmother had this statue of two Siamese cats with these bright blue eyes that she kept on the nightstand in the bedroom where we would sleep when staying with my grandparents. I didn't realize for entirely too long that they had a small light bulb inside the statue that would make the cat's eyes light up. They lived out in the country, and it would get really dark in that room. My brother would tell me the cats were haunted and would try to attack at night. Then he would turn on the light to make the eyes light up and tell me they were about to attack me. It freaked me out every time. And I disliked that statue. Story 37. Tsunamis. I lived in the mountains and just imagined a huge wave crashing over it towards us. Flute music terrifies me. Story 38. Thunder and lightning. Not particularly silly in of itself, except now I'm studying to become a meteorologist. Story 39. My grandmother bought me a subscription to National Geographic magazine when I was a kid. I read it voraciously and loved the pictures of animals. But also when laying in bed at night, I had this irrational fear that an elephant or rhino would come charging through the wall of my house and attack me or run me over. Also, I had an irrational fear of overflowing toilets. I used to have this recurring dream of being in a big room full of rows and rows of toilets that were all just gently overflowing. It was clean water, there was nothing in there, but it was no less disturbing. Story 40. I was terrified of my walk-in closet as a child. The closet was the size of a large bathroom or small hallway, but the house itself had an A-frame. So when you walked into the closet after about 6 feet, there was a little nook-crawl space, and as you walked back out, to the right was an inclined platform that led straight up to a small door to the attic. Before we moved in and my mom told me about the closet, I was really excited to have such a big closet to myself. As 6-year-olds do, I fantasized about making a secret hideout, stuffed animal landslides, and sliding down the incline like I was in a playground. Those fantasies came to a halt when I stood in front of the closet for the first time. Something felt off about that closet. Something felt off about that whole house. It always felt like someone was watching me, like I was never alone. An overwhelming sense of anxiety and discomfort coursed through my veins, and when I walked into the closet, the air felt thick and suffocating. It just felt wrong. If I needed to get something from the closet, I would open the door with my head turned in the opposite direction, and I'd turn the light on by pulling on the rusted chain with my eyes held tightly shut. I remember the sound of the chain grinding against the light fixture before the light switched on. I was afraid of my closet during the day, and I never went into my closet at night, and I never forgot to lock the closet door before going to bed. When you touched the doorknob, it made kind of a rattling sound like something was loose inside, or the doorknob itself was just worn down. But let's just stop there for a second on this train of thought, because what is the purpose of having a lock on a closet door? Seriously, why would someone install a lock on a closet door? To keep people from going in? No. That can't be right because it was a push lock. So if you turn the knob from the outside, it unlocks the door. You don't need a special key. It just didn't make sense. But I didn't think twice about the reason for the lock at the time. I just had a gut feeling that the door should remain locked. To this day, I believe the lock was installed to keep something from coming into the house. I still have nightmares about that house, about that closet. I wake up 25 years in the past. I look toward the closet and the door swings open. There's a thin, bald man crouching in the nook of the closet. He looks at me with bright white-yellow eyes, smiles with rotted teeth, and charges toward me. I wake before he reaches me. Story 41. Firanas. I was convinced they were released into the cold freshwater lakes around me and were going to eat my legs until I had stumps. I was 11. Story 42. When I was maybe 7 or 8, I thought that all sewers led to the ocean. I also thought that all toilets were connected to sewers. So naturally, I thought that my toilet was connected to the ocean. This led me to be afraid of an octopus coming up out of the toilet and grabbing me. So I started only hovering on every toilet I used, yes, including those in my house, for fear of being pulled down into the sewer and then into the ocean and disappearing forever. Not sure when I got over this fear, but it makes me laugh today. TLDR, I was afraid that sitting down on the toilet would literally lead to my passing. Story 43. Hanging a foot off the bed or any limb, somebody going to snatch it right up. Also would use stuffed animal as first line of defense. Monsters eat stuffed animals first, then I have hopefully time to escape. Story 44. Decepticons under my bed. My aunts used to tell me this to keep me in bed whenever they were babysitting. They knew I was terrified of those fuckers, yet they still threatened me, saying if I put my foot on the floor that they'd, Decepticons, would cut it off and eat it. My dad was livid when he found out, not only because his sisters were assholes telling a 3-year-old such garbage, but he then had to deprogram my poor little head so I wouldn't be screaming in the middle of the night that Decepticons were going to eat me whenever I woke up, and he wasn't there. He was a single father working all darn day and didn't need this shoot, lol. Story 45. I couldn't fall asleep if any of the pot lids were on the pots in the kitchen drawers. I thought that the built-up pressure would cause an explosion, and we'd all die. Story 46. Spiders. I'm so glad I got over arachnophobia. It is possible. Lucas. The spider on YouTube helped me. 3. Story 47. I'm sure this one is common, but when Jaws was popular, even though kids my age weren't able to see the movie, we still heard all about it. My mom also had the book. The cover had the girl swimming with Jaws below her. I never even saw the movie at that time, and I was still afraid in the bathtub. Story 48. FKN Quicksand. In the late 70s and early 80s, movies and TV made it seem like quicksand was everywhere, and it was inevitable that you'd fall into it at some point. Story 49. Around 8 or 9, watched an old black and white movie about flesh-eating bacteria transmitted after touching a contaminated surface. Spent a few weeks washing my hands and lifting them like a surgeon about to operate. Story 50. My 4th grade teacher would assign homework out of a workbook which she never checked. I never did any of the assignments, just kept the workbook with the blank areas for answers empty at the bottom of my desk. I just left the barely written-in assignment book in there on the last day of school and worried all summer that someone would find it and turn me in. Story 51. I saw a Gremlins 2 preview in the theater when Home Alone came out, and I was terrified at bedtime for weeks. Story 52. I was convinced the tissue box at the end of my bed was a monster at night also, the shoe rack. I was sure that thing was a vampire. Story 53. The cover to the book Close Encounters of the Third Kind scared me shitless as a kid, and the darn book was sold practically everywhere for a while. I started sleeping with my blanket over my eyes in case an alien was in my bedroom. Story 54. I have 2. 1. When I was really little, maybe 4 or 5, I saw some commercial or TV show that convinced me that a skeleton lived in the toilet and could only come up when you flushed, so when I would flush the toilet, I would sprint out of the bathroom as fast as I can and slam the door. 2. Otzi the Iceman. I watched part of a PBS show on it and thought this ice mummy was so scary and thought he was going to come walking down the hallway and get me at night. Story 55. Oh man, this took me back 50 years. I have two things. The first one was when I was in kindergarten. There was a hole in the wall, about 6 inches around, in the bathroom. One of my classmates said there is a hand with a knife in there. I was terrified of that hand. I couldn't go to sleep. I was crying. Finally went to my brother's room to ask him if there was a hand with a knife. I can still vividly see what I thought it would look like. The second was, we had a little closet outside my bedroom, and I thought little, mean people who lived in there. I would cry and make my dad check it before I could fall asleep. Story 56. It's hard to explain unless you've seen it, but in a town 40 meters away from mine is a giant statue of a Sasquatch with a loincloth giving a thumbs up. We always had to drive past it when going to my grandparents', and without fail every time I'd start crying. TBF, even at 24, it still kinda freaks me out. Story 57. Learning about atomic fission and then being terrified of cutting anything, because if I did it just so I'd destroy my entire town. Story 58. My grandfather's oxygen machine. It was so loud, and he had tubes that extended like 10 feet, and I was scared of stepping on it, because in my lying 5-year-old mind that would mean he couldn't breathe and would die instantly. Story 59. I watched that one scene in Look Who's Talking where he's potty training and the Toliet starts talking. I was terrified to go to the bathroom at night for years. Story 60. The dark. I'm still scared of it, and I'm almost 48. I had a well-meaning friend try to comfort me through my fear by telling me, "You're not afraid of the dark, you're afraid of what's in it." It absolutely made it worse, and my house is full of little dim lights, so it's not ever completely dark. I also have an irrational fear of werewolves that I never fully outgrew. I think I'm just a mess. Story 61. A hand crawling down the inside of a turned-off TV. Saw a photo of that on a book about ghosts in the 70s, and spent my adolescence closing my eyes when I walked past a turned-off TV. Story 62. Well, I used to think I was silly as a child for being scared that bridges might collapse when we were driving over them. But then, as an adult, a freeway bridge where I live did collapse, dumping cars into a river. Terrifying. Story 63. Mirrors. I had terrible nightmares my whole childhood, and often